Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the Prophecy of Malachi, and we are in chapter 2. And I left by asking a question. Now, chapter 2, God rebukes men for mistreating their wife, for treating them treacherously, and then hating their wives, and then divorcing them. And so the question is, can you divorce for any reason? And the answer is no, but you first have to understand what marriage is. So what is marriage? Well, Jesus answered that for us. He said that marriage is between a man and a woman. So that's marriage. Okay, that's what God created. Jesus then came and emphasized that marriage is between a man and a woman. I'm not going to get into um, the LGBT situation. I said because I don't focus on that, and one of the reasons why, because to me they're not my enemy. And what my perspective is, I think the church has been foolish to take a social and an issue, then made it political, and they're losing the war at that. So now, if two women get married, why would I stand up and I don't hit my point. I don't get into that. I don't care that I don't care that they get married. I don't care if two men get married. But here's the paradigm that the church created. By making this a social and then political issue instead of a biblical issue, you now created the paradigm where we have to get into an unnecessary fight. Now, what do I mean by that? So first, you start off when I say it's that you took this, which should have been a biblical issue, and when you think about this, and I'm really going off here, I didn't intend to do that, but I think it's important. But when you think about throughout the Bible, how many times did the Bible actually deal with the homosexual issue in comparison to the adulterer, the fornicator, the idolater, right? And it was around. It certainly was around from the beginning of the sinful man. It was around. Um, it wasn't an issue, for example, in the church. It wasn't an issue. Think about it. You don't really have Paul in his teaching about here's how you handle the gays, right? You don't. But here's what happened. Now we come along in our century, and then all of a sudden it went from being a biblical issue to a social and political issue. So now we have such silly fights as should a Christian make a wedding cake for two men getting married? I think that's a silly argument from a Christian's perspective. But that's the paradigm that was created. In other words, you have a person that says, "Well, I'm not going to make I'm not going to make a wedding cake." Why not? Who cares? Well, I'm co-signing to their sin. Well, there's a lot that you can co-sign to. And again, I want to be clear about this. There's a lot that you can co-sign to. If you work at a grocery store that sells liquor, that sells pornography, by working there, are you co-signing? Are you participating in that? Uh, and so, and here's another thing, and I always like to kind of chime in on this. The very same people had no problem with staying out of the racism fight. Which was worse? I want you to think about that. Which was worse? This group of people that said, I'm rejecting this group of people whom God loves. So whites and not talking about the church, whites who rejected their black brothers and Christians and said they're not equal with us. They can't fellowship with us. They can't worship with us. Okay? So which sin was worse? And he talked, by the way, and Jesus talks about racism, the sin of racism, way more than he talks about homosexuality. And not to get into, you know, a blank blank match, but what I'm saying is that by making that, and this was something that was kind of made on purpose to say, let's throw our back in the 60s when you had the then religious right in its form back then that began to enter into the political arena. And thus they got into and made certain um, declarations. And one of the declarations was school, prayer in school, which now has been kind of deleted. They lost that battle. But abortion and the gay rights. And what has happened over the decades is that Christians treat that as if that is the issue that God is just falling off of his throne over. Oh my God, right? And instead of the message of Christ to reach people, the message of Christ to reach people, now you make them an enemy. You make them an enemy, and now it becomes a fight. So now, guess what? How do you fight? It becomes a kind of a fight if when gays want to come into a church and say, accept my gayness. I want to be a worship leader. I want to be an associate pastor. I want to work in a children's ministry, etc. And then you got to say, well, no, you can't do that. Okay, you can't do that. So that's why I don't get into that because, again, as they say, to each his own. Let me share Christ with you. Just like I share Christ with the racist. Okay. All right. So in the beginning, God made them male and female. So that's my statement. And you can get into all kinds of biblical, debate from, you can say homosexuals to try to justify. And ultimately, trust me, they're not going to even care. Ultimately, they won't have the shield of the Bible. Okay. All right. So let's get back to it. And so I want to in Mark's gospel. Remember, verse 16 says, "If he hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord God of Israel, he covers his garment with injustice." Now, last time we looked at what was the biblical, the Mosaic justification for divorce, and it was immorality. You could say adultery. But notice what God is condemning them with this divorce for was if he hates and divorces his wife, right? And the reason why you have to kind of pay attention to this, as I said, a lot of people today use the Old Testament command of adultery for divorce. So even if you was going to use that, that would be the only one. The vast majority of reasons for divorce today is not because of infidelity. Think about that there when he says if you hate and divorce your wife, that's not, you just hate her. You're mistreating her. He said you act treacherously against her. But look here, look at verse number 5. But Jesus told them he wrote this command to you because of the hardness of your heart. Even in Christendom, you have a lot of people try to use the Old Testament means for justifications for, for divorce, and yet they certainly like to ignore what Jesus said here, that the reason he gave that reason, adultery, was because of the hardness of your heart. But from the beginning of the creation of God, made them male and female for this reason. Man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. And so this is, again, understanding what God's purpose. What did God do in marriage? He joined the two together. And only because of the hardness of their hearts that he allowed a divorce to happen if adultery happened. Now, what happens when adultery is not the cause? So let's ask this question. Is God joining just any two together for just any other unbiblical reasons? And the answer to that is no. The answer is that God is not just allowing, God is not just condoning. And that puts a lot of people into a situation today. Because I can tell you, I know people personally who have divorced and then remarried. So let's just say, even if you divorced, did God give you permission to remarry? Now I'm going to tackle that later. But let me go to Ezra. Let's go to Ezra. And I want to show you something from Ezra that became interesting here for me to make my point. Now, I kind of dealt with this several studies ago, several studies ago, and I want you to this. And by the way, Ezra is the same time frame, remember, as Malachi, Zechariah, Haggai, Nehemiah, and that same time frame, post-exile time frame. And what had happened is that as they came back from the land, after they rebuilt the temple, the wall, the city of Jerusalem, they began to fall back into their old ways. One of the sins was they began to marry foreign women. And so I dealt with the idea of this is not interracial marriage, by the way. This does not have anything to do with race, and why that God had condemned this. Look at verse 2. Indeed, the Israelite men have taken some of their daughters as wives and some of their sons, so that the holy seed has become mixed with the surrounding people. The leaders and officials have taken the lead in this unfaithfulness. Now, when you look at, I'm going to skip down to chapter 10. Look at verse 2. Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, and Emelite responded to Ezra, "We have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women, from the surrounding people. But there is still hope for Israel in spite of this. He says, let us make a covenant. Let us therefore make a covenant before our God to send away all of the foreign wives and their children, according to the counsel of my Lord and of those who tremble at the command of our God. Let it be done according to the law. And then he says, get up, for this matter is your responsibility, and we support you be strong and take action. So, and again, let me emphasize that the reason wasn't that it was race or even ethnicity. The reason that God did not want them mixing with the foreign people because they were extremely immoral, extremely wicked, extremely ungodly, violent, in some of the most vile ways. That's why God didn't want the children of Israel marrying them. And notice he said, right, and that's what the term of mixing the seed. So they began to marry these women, and notice what their resolve was to send their wives away. And then when we skip down to verse, here he gives a whole list of all the leaders that had married foreign women. But look at the very last verse here. Verse 44 says, and all of these had married foreign women, and some of the wives had given birth to children. This is always the kind of unfortunate outcome, that when they sent these wives away, they said, no, that they're giving birth to children. And by the way, this is what you're seeing as to some of the origins of the Samaritans that Jesus dealt with, that the Jews in the gospel times hated. They called them half-breeds. Here's why. Again, had nothing to do with race or ethnicity, but their wicked ways. Okay, their wicked ways. And on the other hand, you see that God did not care. I mean, in other words, no, I should say this. Let me rephrase that. It was permitted for people who converted to God, who embraced the God of Israel. They could not only come and live among the Israelites, they could marry. You have at least three foreign women in the bloodline of Jesus: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth. Yep, those three were the very women that's listed with the group, the neighborhood of people here. Okay, and they're in the bloodline of Jesus. But in each case, it didn't say so much about Tamar as much, but Ruth and Rahab, they certainly had faith and embraced the God of Israel. So we come back to our question then: does God join together just any kind of relationship? The answer is no. That God does not just join together any relationship. So if you go out and then you get married, and it is not a godly marriage, God is not joining you together. And I want you to kind of think about the term, he's not bonding you together. So that was true even in the Old Testament. Here you had in the Old Testament that they got married, but God did not recognize their marriage. He did not recognize their marriage. All right, guys, we're going to continue on this. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.